Um, Welcome. If you like this content, if you want to see more of it, I implore you to hit the like button down there, the subscribe button, get your notifications going if you're into that, and possibly hit up the Patreon and become a contributing member to make all of this possible. Right now I'm bankrolling my entire operation. I ain't got that kind of scratch anymore. So if you feel like giving a hand, getting some free swag, and seeing more of the content you want to see, I suggest getting involved. Have a great day. Hi, and welcome to Comfortable Lives. Today's episode is on masks. A while ago, I had proposed that maybe we should do some sort of comprehensive study on the long-term effects of wearing masks. I was met with a lot of resistance in this, a lot of complaints, a lot of arguing, a lot of I don't care about people, how dare I question the science. We won't get into the fact that questioning science is what you're supposed to do. That is what science is. And a lot has come to light since I made that statement, and I was yelled at about how, well, I was called a bitch for questioning whether or not wearing masks for 8 hours straight was a good idea. I had a personal experience. I had gotten pink eye twice since the beginning of this, and as it turned out, that pink eye was caused by bacteria that I was breathing out that was getting pushed up into my eyes from my mouth. I had an infection that I did not know about in my gum, and that was all taken care of, and oddly enough the pink eye went away. But it was a very odd occurrence because every 28 days I was getting pink eye from when I went back to work, and it was inconvenient to say the least. At work, I wear a mask for the entirety of the time that I'm at work, aside from when I go on break for a cigarette, which is roughly about every 2 hours-ish. One of the things that I noticed, and I'm going to say that this is a very small sample size, this is not a very scientific poll, but most people have issues with their skin where the mask is. I don't know if it shows so much on my ears, but my ears are like this most of the day because of wearing a mask, and I feel like they're out more than they normally would be. I don't know. I decided I was going to start compiling some research, I guess we could call it. I asked the question, out there in the internet world, and I was answered by the National Institute for Health, which is a government agency, and ClinMed, the International Medical Library. As it turns out, going back as far as 2005, there have been various studies involving wearing masks and the adverse effects of that for prolonged periods of time. That is not to say if you're going to the grocery store, if the grocery store has a sign saying masks are required, you being in there for 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or even an hour is going to translate into this adverse effect. But for prolonged periods of time, throughout the term of an entire workday, wearing a mask actually, according to the National Institute for Health and and ClinMed, it's actually not a good thing to do. There's been a lot of chit chat from people about how Dr. Fauci from the infamous pandemic team stated back in 2008 that masks caused more deaths than influenza did in 1918, and there is no truth to that statement. He literally did not say that at all. He did participate on the paper where something to that effect was hypothesized. Most of the influenza-related deaths had bacterial pneumonia in their lungs, and as it turns out, bacterial pneumonia, the staphylococcus that causes that, lives inside of almost every single human being all the time in our nasal passages. And if you happen to breathe in through your mouth and out through your nose, you're potentially breathing that stuff into your lungs. Is that to say that wearing masks for a prolonged period of time definitively causes pneumonia? No, not in the slightest. I am not making any assumptions because I'm not doing any scientific studies myself. What I am saying is that there is a strange uptick in bacterial pneumonia amongst people who are and have been working for my employer. And my employer requires us all to wear masks for the entirety of the time that we are at work, aside from when we are eating or if we're smokers. So the odd thing is, my unhealthy habit of smoking has potentially made me not one of the members of the statistic of people who get bacterial pneumonia, also known as walking pneumonia, because, well, every 2 or so hours I take my mask off and I smoke a cigarette. Odd how that worked out. A lot could be said for, the method of testing. Why is something that appears in the lungs being tested for in the sinus cavity, and stuff like that? There's a lot of questions, and the fact that nobody actually respects anybody who asks those questions is really telling to some of the things that I've been talking about, and some of the things I will be talking about how people prefer their confirmation bias and how people prefer their team. And I don't really want to spoil the season finale of Comfortable Lies, because that's coming up in 2 episodes, but it all really ties in together. I started this podcast talking about social issues, and then I just ended up getting harangued into the single social issue. But more on that in the coming weeks. ClinMed, their study was the most recent one. And all of the links for these studies, I'm going to put them right down there in the description, so you can go and take a look at everything that, well, some of the things that I was looking at. Anything that was not a journal did not make the cut. I required either government health paperwork, despite the fact that I don't trust the government, studies that the government has done in the past, can inform us of what's going on now. So, the fact that the government had made a study on wearing masks, positives, negatives, what have you, is relevant only in the fact that it's unbiased, because it was prior to COVID-19. prior to Trump presidency in most cases. So there you go. We can't really go, oh, well, that's Trump's statistic. No, everything is literally prior to Trump, with the exception of this, and this is not actually a government site. This is a Journal of Infectious Disease and Epidemiology. I'm just going to do a quick read on the results. Now, granted, this is not a large-scale poll. This was done with frontline healthcare workers in New York City. The total participants were 343 for this study. 59% of them wore primarily N95 masks, and 40.8% wore surgical masks throughout their shifts. Reported side effects include headache, acne, skin breakdown, impaired cognition. The majority respondents, 91% of them, report one or more of the following adverse effects, while 8.5 report none of these effects. So 90% of the people who are wearing masks for a prolonged period of time. When I'm talking about negative side effects of wearing masks, I'm talking about hours, not minutes. And their highest reported side effect, and this is direct from the study, 71% respondents had headaches. 15% stated their headaches occurred within 1 hour of wearing the masks, and 30% said after 1 hour of wearing the mask, and 29% after 3 or more hours. And out of the respondents, 70% of them had no prior history of onset headaches. Like, I don't get headaches for no reason whatsoever. I have to hit my head, or I have to be dehydrated, or I have to be severely hungry, or I have to be constipated. You know, there's plenty of reasons why you get headaches. But if you don't get them because you get migraines, or you have high blood pressure, or this or that or the other thing, then you don't really have a history of headaches. And a majority, 71% of the respondents, had no prior history of headaches. So it's not a matter, it is a matter of correlation causation. More work really needs to be done on this study rather than considering this a final answer, but the potential that this is a side effect of prolonged mask wearing is telling, because if you do have a headache, there is something wrong. They also mentioned after removing masks, within 30 minutes, 14% of the respondents felt relief. 28% it took an hour. 33% it took an hour, and 28% required medication for treatment to resolve the headache. So this is now, granted, they're not talking about like migraine level medication. They're talking about Motrin or Tylenol. Now, sensitive skin is another subject that was touched on in this survey. Prior history of sensitive skin was reported in almost 50% of the respondents. 51% reported skin breakdown as an adverse side effect of prolonged mask wearing. When I talk about skin breakdown, I mean abrasions behind the ear, across the nose, under the chin, places where the mask is physically pressed against the skin. 18% reported skin breakdown within 1 to 3 hours of mask use, and 44% after 3 hours. For those who had skin breakdown, most common area was the bridge of the nose, the cheeks, and other areas were the chin, behind the ears. To alleviate skin breakdown, most used lotions, creams such as bacitracin, Aquifer, what have you. 8% of them used Band-Aids, or other bandages such as Maplex and Duoderm. Acne accounted for 53% of the participants, with 11% reporting acne within 1 to 3 hours of mask use, and 47% after 3 hours of mask use. So out of the 53%, out of the 100%, 11% of them reported it, and 47% reported after 3 hours. History of acne was reported in 35% of the cases. So a third of the respondents in total had a history of acne, and of them, 53% reported acne flare-ups. Out of the 100%, 53% reported acne flare-ups. Impaired cognition, and this one's kind of tied to that whole, oh, well, it cuts off my oxygen levels, was the least reported adverse effect. So, to be fair, you probably can breathe through a mask. I'm just saying. Only 23% reported any impaired cognition, and 2%, well, almost 3% were within 1 hour, 9% were 1 to 3 hours, and 16% were 4 hours or more. To say that, well, no, it won't negatively affect you. No, it won't negatively affect you going to the grocery store and wearing a mask. I'll be the first person to say that. Physically, should not be a problem for any functioning human being to wear a mask for going to the store, for going into a business, for a hair job. I don't have hair, so you know I'm kind of alien on that stuff. But wearing them for long periods of time, there is substance to the thought process. As recent as this year, other studies also mention adverse effects of prolonged mask use. From PMC, the U.S. National Library of Medicine, this is a medical journal that archives studies. There was a study done on hospital workers in Bangkok in 2014. This would, I believe, be the next most recent study. Yeah, the next most recent study of note that I bothered to take, because it was actually a study as opposed to a mainstream media article saying, no, you're full of shit. And I'm just going to read the conclusion, because the results have to do with a lot of ppm numbers and stuff like that, and I'm not expecting you guys to understand any of that. Sorry. Basically, their conclusion is high bacterial contamination outside the area of used masks demonstrated, and it showed a significant correlation with microbial air quality of working wards. Basically, if you're in a place that where there's a lot of mask wearing, the masks themselves become contaminated because you're breathing into them, and because eventually microbes can escape that mask while you're breathing through them, you are literally giving birth to a veritable bloom of bacteria in the air around you by wearing a mask. Now, you're not hosing down your coworkers or people in the store or what have you, because you're not breathing directly on them, but the masks themselves are blooming because of high humidity, high temperature, and as you breathe out, you're actually exhaling, granted in a much shorter distance, but in a much higher concentration, microbes. Just what the study says. Again, these are all studies, and you can look them up yourselves. You can clicky the link down there and take a look and see what they're saying. But the study was done basically for assessing the risks of healthcare workers to getting infected themselves, and turns out that it was explaining what prolonged use of a mask would do to the air quality around you as a person wearing a mask for a prolonged period of time. This is not I'm not citing a random guy who decided to go running around with a test kit and grab 10 people and test. This is the real deal. This is actual science happening. Actual science. But the conclusion, and this is cited, this is referenced, so this is not just a random dude who just decided to make a claim on the internet. This is the real deal. This is a study. The present study revealed that the high bacterial contamination on the outside area of the used surgical mask had significantly positive correlation with bacterial and fungal counts found in the air samples that were collected from working wards. To reduce the load of bacterial contamination on the used masks, the hospital environments, especially microbial air quality in the working wards, should be improved. And for the most part, steps were actually taken in this direction in the past 6 years from this study, but these are not steps that are taken in the general workplace environments of where people are now wearing masks for 8 hours a day, and that's also something to consider. Moving on, the infamous article from 2008 where Dr. Fauci claimed to say more people died from bacterial pneumonia than influenza is my next article that I go to. That's the next one back in time at 2008. So in this article, he actually makes two statements. One is just saying, yay, we're considering bacterial pneumonia next time we have a pandemic because, it could be an issue whenever that might happen. All right? Not really saying much of anything, but saying that he notes that bacterial pneumonia actually killed people during the 1918 influenza epidemic. So this is what he had to say as far as the 1918 influenza pandemic. The work presents complementary lines of evidence from the fields of pathology and history of medicine to support this conclusion. The weight of evidence we examined from both historical and modern day analysis of the 1918 influenza pandemic favors a scenario in which viral damage followed by bacterial pneumonia led to a vast majority of deaths, says co-author NIAID Director Anthony S. Fauci, MD. In essence, the virus landed the first blow while the bacteria delivered the knockout punch. What he's basically saying is that influenza weakened the lungs in order to allow the bacteria to take advantage. And this may be the case, but I don't understand how that would be the case for people who are asymptomatic, because they're asymptomatic. They're not experiencing loss of breath or anything like that. They're just carrying the virus and spitting it out, according to what the studies said. You know, according to what the CDC said, you have it, but it's not really physically affecting you. You're just shedding it off on other people. The fact is, he didn't say, oh, well, you know, people who didn't wear masks were burying people who wore masks. But that may have been the case. It may not have been the case. There hasn't been much of a study involving that, specifically because we didn't have the science background that we have now. So it's not fair to say that he made this claim, because he didn't. He obviously didn't make this claim. But that doesn't mean that the claim is necessarily untrue, because we didn't have the scientific faculties to really do that kind of research with the rigor that we have today. That's sort of like going, well, you know, using my star charts from ancient Greece didn't land me exactly where I wanted to be. Well, that's because shit changed between now and then. You know, it's just the way it is, you know. So, you know, with advances in technology and advances in basic human knowledge, we can't really just ignore the fact that this is something that could have been missed back then. I hate to break it to you, but it supports the idea of taking in some sunshine, taking vitamin C, and taking zinc, because those three things will help your immune system deal with pneumonia. It may not save you from a virus, but it will definitely help you with a bacterial pneumonia. Being healthy will help you fight off a bacterial pneumonia. Walking pneumonia, or, you know, bacterial pneumonia, is not a death sentence. Not in the slightest, as long as you're healthy. You know, so again, that's neither here nor there. As far as the link between pneumonia and wearing masks, officially there's really no statement on it, other than the 2014 study where the bacterial load of the area immediately surrounding people who wear a mask for prolonged periods of time. The 2014 study is pretty compelling by comparison to no, you're just being a crybaby and you're selfish and you don't want to wear a mask. I'm sorry, but that's just the reality of the situation there. Effects of wearing an N95 and surgical masks, face masks on heart rate, thermal stress, and subjective sensations. Now, granted, they use the word subjective here, so that means it's how the person wearing it perceives it. But their methods were based off of a very small sample group, so it was only 10 people. Again, so this was 2005. The study was done by Occupational Environmental Health. It's an international organization. This is again on the NIH, you know, National Institute of Health, government-sponsored website. So it's the United States government, and this is from 2005. So this is well before Trump. So you can't really even say, well, this is the government propaganda thing. I mean, it's just a study. Now, it was only done to 10 people, so take that for what it's worth. The study includes the use of two types of masks, surgical masks and N95s. The results from the study demonstrate that heart rate, microclimate, temperature and humidity, and subjective ratings were significantly influenced by wearers of different masks. Basically, they're saying that when you put a face mask on and you start doing tasks, your body starts reacting to it, and subjectively you feel that reaction. Your reaction to your body's natural reaction to having a cloth over your face that's holding in heat, holding in moisture. Your brain, your conscious part of your brain, is reacting to the unconscious part of your brain, your involuntary reactions to that stimulus. All of this to say, maybe wearing masks all the time is not the best policy. There isn't actually a culture that does that. People like to cite Asian cultures for wearing masks, but they only do that in the city, and they only do that when they're in the city. Meaning, like, if you go to Tokyo and you're walking around Tokyo, you'll see a bunch of people wearing masks. If you work in Tokyo and you go inside of a business, those masks aren't necessarily always there. I mean, there are people who will choose to wear all day long, but the fact of the matter is that it's not like a shame thing. It's not, when there's 100 people packed onto a bus that's meant for 90 people, wearing a mask is sort of a courtesy, because then you're not breathing all over people. But when you're sitting alone at your desk and there's nobody there, there's really no point to wearing one. And the same kind of goes for every other walk of life in Asian countries. You're in a major city, you're wearing a mask when you're out on the street, because you're talking about millions of people that are constantly around one another. I wouldn't be surprised, using the Asian example, in places like LA, New York City, maybe Jacksonville, maybe. But you're kind of missing the point. You have to wear a mask if you're going to be around people all the time. But the insanity, the American exceptionalism to this, is that there are people who are going, well, when you're sitting at home, you should be wearing a mask because you don't want to infect your kid. When you're sitting at home, when you're in a car by yourself, that's American extremism. There you go. There's the real word for it. Americans, they do things to the extreme. They go, oh, well, the Japanese, they wear masks. I see pictures of Tokyo and everyone's wearing a face mask. Yeah, in the middle of the city. But if you take your camera and you go and take your ass out into rural country, you're not going to find that. If you take it into the buildings where there's not public traffic, private building where people are working and it's not a public place, you don't find them. You don't see them everywhere. And there's a reason why. Because they're not necessary. They're necessary when you're surrounded by millions of people. It's courteous to not breathe on millions of random strangers. However, whenever America does anything, they do it to the nth degree of extremism, and one day we're going to have to realize that that's actually a problem, because it causes more problems than it solves. So now, for our comfortable lie. The CDC suggested that you wear masks, so obviously wearing masks is the only virtuous thing that you could possibly do. And if you don't, you're obviously evil and in league with the great orange monster. The reality is that no one's done a comprehensive study or paid attention to the not so comprehensive studies on prolonged mask wearing, on the physical effects on humans, on the psychological effects on humans, and on the potential health risks that wearing masks for a prolonged period of time may pose on the general population. We have to really consider what we consider science at this point. We are now coming into a time period where Bill Nye, the science guy, who, sure, he's an engineer, which is a science, but he's not a biological scientist. He's not a chemist. He's not a virologist. He's not a epidemiologist, blah, 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 blah. He's an engineer. And he knows some cool science stuff, and that's awesome. But at the end of the day, the people who are coming up into being adults were taught that science was something that was definitive, was factual, was more like a religion than a study. The fathers of scientific observation, all the way back in ancient Greece and ancient Egypt, would be sad to see how the general public views science. At least the general public viewed things that were science as magic or the work of the gods back then. There's really no excuse with the dissemination of information to have these types of views where you treat your science as a religion, as a god, an unknowable god, and your bishops and popes and rabbis and imams of science dictate to you what the science says. Science doesn't say anything, it just suggests things. It's up to rational individuals to take that information and then use that information in their day-to-day life. That's what makes science a useful tool. When you throw that away and decide, I'm not going to do any thinking for myself, I'm just going to trust what some expert said, you fall into the same problem that you fall into trusting politicians. Everybody's got an agenda. Just because someone has a PhD doesn't mean they don't. And most times, those agendas have more to do with what's good for them than what's good for anybody else. This has been Comfortable Lies, where there wasn't really much of a lie there to talk about. It was just the truth. Sorry.